Wow. You've given us a lot on spirituality to go through, from like ancient stuff to modern psychology. It's a lot. So listeners, get ready, because in this deep dive, we're going to explore all the different ways that people connect with something bigger than themselves. And we're going to try to find the common threads that link all those experiences together.
You know, what's really interesting about all this stuff you've given me is how it shows just how much the way we see spirituality is changing. You know, it's not just about religion anymore, though. I mean, that's still a big part of it, obviously.
You know, that's a good point, and it actually makes me think about something I saw when I was reading through all of this. One of the first things that stood out to me was like the root of the word spirituality itself. Did you know that it comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breath?
It's true, and when you really think about it, breath is like this incredible link between like who we are physically and something bigger than us, something else out there. You know, is that like that life force, that thing we all share. It's what connects us to the world.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty powerful image. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's lay some groundwork here. You've got articles in this stack about religious spirituality and then secular spirituality. It seems like there are just as many definitions of spirituality as there are people trying to, figure it out.
That's very true. And it's easy to get caught up in, trying to define it exactly. I think what's really important is that at its core, spirituality is all about searching for meaning. It's about searching for that connection with something else. It's about those big questions, the ones that don't always have like clear answers about like our place in the universe or our purpose or, just what's beyond all of this that we experience every day.
So how do we start to understand all these different ways that people are trying to answer these questions? I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, actually, your research gives us a pretty helpful way to think about it by putting it into 4 different but connected perspectives. Mm-hmm. There's religious spirituality, secular spirituality, personal spirituality, and then that connection between spirituality and psychology.
It's like we're putting together a map, and those 4 things are like our compass.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
So, let's start with what most people probably think of first. Religious spirituality.
I think when we're talking about religious spirituality, it's really important to remember that even within this one category, there are a ton of different ideas about it. Like each religion looks at spirituality in its own way, right? They've got their own practices and beliefs and interpretations and all that.
So it's less about finding a single definition that everyone agrees on and more about understanding the different things that each tradition brings to the table.
Yeah, exactly. For example, think about Christianity. Like a big theme there is about, building a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And you can see that in things they do like prayer and studying the Bible and participating in things like communion.
It's about that direct connection with something bigger than yourself. It's about searching for guidance and finding comfort in that.
Right. And then you've got Islam, where it's all about submitting yourself to the will of Allah. There are 5 pillars: prayer, fasting during Ramadan, giving to charity, the profession of faith, and the pilgrimage to Mecca. That all shows how much their faith is a part of their everyday lives.
Yeah, it's about like making sure your actions line up with your beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about working towards that feeling of surrender and devotion.
Absolutely. And if we look at Hinduism, you see a huge focus on that whole cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, where the ultimate goal is to reach liberation or moksha. Things like meditation, yoga, and devotion to all the different deities are all like key practices in Hinduism.
It really makes you think about how different cultures all over have thought about these big concepts, life and death and what comes after for like centuries.
And we can't forget about Buddhism, with its emphasis on mindfulness, meditation, and reaching enlightenment. It's about, breaking free from suffering by really understanding like the truth about reality.
So many different paths, but they're all like striving for something beyond the material world.
And that's what's so cool. Like you've got these traditions, each one with its own point of view and its own practices, and they still give guidance and meaning to literally billions of people all over the world.
Okay, so we've talked about how some people find that spiritual side of themselves through organized religion. What about all those people out there who say they're spiritual, but not religious. That's where secular spirituality comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And your research shows that more and more people are going this route these days. It's like we live in such a fast-paced, kind of chaotic world, right? So people are trying to find ways to get that peace, that meaning, that connection outside of traditional religious institutions, you know?
Yeah. It's like they're making their own spiritual cocktails or something. They're taking bits from different traditions, different philosophies to like make a practice that feels right for them. It's about like making your own experience, right?
Exactly. And that is where we see things like mindfulness, yoga, and connecting with nature becoming really popular.
Practices that have been around forever but are like being looked at again, you know, reinterpreted maybe like in a more modern way.
You're totally right. Like mindfulness has its roots in Buddhist meditation, but now people from all kinds of backgrounds practice it, a lot of times without any religious meaning at all. And it's not just about finding a little peace and quiet. There's actually some real science behind it.
That's right. I was reading about stuff like mindfulness-based stress reduction, I think it's called. It's something they're using in therapy now to help people with anxiety, depression, even chronic pain.
It's pretty amazing how something as simple as like paying attention to your breath can have such a big impact on your mind and your body.
And yoga. I mean, now that's something that has exploded in the 21st century, right? But it goes way back, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yoga started in ancient India, and it was a huge part of both Hinduism and Buddhism back then. And while it still has like a deep spiritual significance for a lot of people, it's also become a popular way to exercise and de-stress for tons of others who might not be into the whole religious part of it.
It's a great example of how these older practices can, you know, change with the times and find new meaning for people today. Like, they have all this wisdom that we can still learn from, no matter our background or beliefs.
That's exactly it. And speaking of making your own set of beliefs, that takes us to our next category, personal spirituality.
This is where things get really interesting, right? It's all about making your own unique spiritual journey, taking inspiration from all kinds of places and finding what speaks to you personally. It's like making a mixtape, but for your soul, right?
I love that. It really is about that journey of self-discovery and exploration, figuring out who you are. Some people might find themselves drawn to parts of Buddhism, while others might connect with philosophical ideas, or even find that spiritual connection through things like art or music or just being out in nature.
So it's less about sticking to strict rules and more about trusting your gut and going your own way.
Exactly. And don't forget, this isn't like a one-time thing. It's going to change and grow as you do. You'll bring in new ideas and try new things and have new experiences along the way.
You know, I have to say, of all the stuff you sent me, I think I was most fascinated by the connection between spirituality and psychology. It seems like for a long time they were seen as two totally different things, maybe even like opposites. But now we're seeing them come together more and more. What do you think's going on there?
What I find fascinating is that for so long, there's this imaginary line between spirituality and psychology. You know, psychology, which is all about understanding, like our minds, our emotions, our behaviors, often seemed like it was the opposite of spirituality, which is more about, you know, finding meaning in our purpose and our connection to something bigger. But more recently, people are starting to see that these two things aren't separate after all. They actually work together. And it's actually really interesting how they do that.
It's like they're two sides of the same coin, right? They're both trying to understand what it means to be human, but are just coming at it from different angles.
That's it, exactly. And I think as we really get into these four perspectives on spirituality, you'll notice that this connection between the mind and spirit keeps coming up over and over again.
Okay, so let's recap for a sec. We've talked about the difference between religious spirituality and secular spirituality, and we even dove into those four different perspectives: religious, secular, personal, and that link to psychology. It's like we're starting to see the forest instead of just the trees, right? Like all these different ways of approaching spirituality, each with its own little quirks, but ultimately they're all looking for something more than just the everyday.
That's a great way to put it. And it really speaks to those common threads that run through all these different paths, you know, the things that bring them together.
And that's actually a perfect transition, because one of the articles you sent talked about those universal themes, you know, those things that seem to be true across any religion or practice. What were some of those big ones that stood out to you?
Well, I think one that really jumps out, but you know, we've already kind of touched on, is this deep need for connection that we all have.
Because deep down, we all want to feel like we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, right?
That's right. And your research suggests it's more than just like wanting to fit in. It's actually like built into us. Humans are social creatures, right? So naturally, we crave that connection with something bigger than just our little group, you know?
Yeah.
And spirituality, in a lot of ways, is about tapping into that feeling, that longing to be connected to something greater than ourselves, whether it's higher power, nature, all of humanity, or even just a deeper part of ourselves that we haven't really explored yet.
It's like that feeling you get when you look up at the stars at night and like you feel incredibly small, but at the same time you feel connected to this huge, amazing universe. Or that feeling of belonging you might get at, like a really powerful church service where you're surrounded by people who share your beliefs.
Exactly.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
And it doesn't have to be these big, grand external experiences either. That feeling of connection, it can come from simple things like doing something kind for someone else or just like feeling grateful for what you have right now at this moment.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're all in this together, like we're all part of this web of life that connects us all.
That's it. And that feeling, that feeling of being connected to everything, it can be incredibly powerful, especially in a world that often feels really divided.
Okay, so connection is huge. What other universal themes did you find in your research?
Another one that really resonated with me was this idea of finding inner peace, really feeling fulfilled.
Well, yeah, because let's face it, with our crazy busy lives these days, who couldn't use a little more peace and quiet, right?
Exactly. And that's where those spiritual practices, no matter what they look like for you, can really come in handy, whether it's praying, meditating, being mindful, spending time in nature, or even just being creative. These practices can help us find that sense of calm, contentment, and inner harmony.
It's like finding a quiet space inside yourself, a place where you can just be, even when everything around you is chaotic.
Exactly. And it's not about like shutting off your emotions or pretending that the world around you doesn't exist. It's more about learning to ride the waves of life, with more grace, with more acceptance, with more inner strength.
So we've got connection, we've got inner peace. It's almost like a lot of this comes back to that old saying, know thyself, don't you think?
Absolutely. And that actually leads us to another big theme that pops up a lot in the research you gave me, self-discovery.
It's funny because when you first think about it, spirituality seems like it's all about something outside of ourselves, something bigger, right? But then when you really think about it, it's also about looking inward, isn't it? It's about really looking at yourself, your values, your beliefs, your motivations, and figuring out who you really are.
You got it. Spirituality, when you get down to it, is about really understanding yourself on a deeper level. It's about figuring out your strengths and weaknesses, what you're passionate about, what your purpose is. It's about asking those big, sometimes scary questions. Who am I? What do I believe in? What mark do I want to leave on the world?
It's about connecting with that real you deep down, like finding your inner compass that helps you figure out which way to go in life.
And let's be real. That journey of self-discovery, it's not always sunshine and rainbows. It can be tough, even uncomfortable at times, because it forces us to face our flaws, the things we don't like about ourselves, in addition to all the good stuff. But, it's often in those moments of like really looking inward, of asking the tough questions and wrestling with the big picture that we learn and grow the most.
So we're talking about connection, inner peace, and self-discovery. Seems like there's another big idea that ties into all of this idea of transcendence. It comes up a lot in the research, but it's also one of those words that can be hard to wrap your head around. How would you define transcendence when we're talking about spirituality?
That's a great question. It's a big word, for sure. But I think the simplest way to put it is that transcendence is about going beyond the ordinary, beyond the everyday stuff of life. It's about connecting with something bigger than us, something that opens our minds and helps us understand who we are and why we're here.
So it's more than just feeling connected. It's about having experiences that actually change how we see things, how we see ourselves and the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that can look like a lot of different things to different people. For some, it might be a really powerful religious experience or feeling a deep connection with nature. For others, it might be that feeling of awe you get when you see a beautiful piece of art or hear an amazing song or even just watch the sunset.
It's those moments that take your breath away, the ones that make you feel something deep down that maybe even change you a little bit, like you've caught a glimpse of something beyond our everyday reality.
That's it. And those moments of transcendence, they remind us that there's more to life than just going through the motions. They show us that there's this whole other level of reality, of wonder, of possibility that we don't always see, but it's always there, waiting for us to discover it.
So we've got these big ideas: connection, inner peace, self-discovery, and transcendence. They're like the foundation, the building blocks for all sorts of spiritual paths. But realistically, how does any of this work in our crazy, busy world today? You know, with all the distractions, all the pressure, all the information coming at us all the time, where does spirituality even fit in?
Yeah, I think that's a big question for a lot of us these days, right? I mean, there's just so much going on. It's easy to feel pulled in a million directions and like lose track of what really matters. And that's what's always made me curious about spirituality. You know, it seems to offer that sense of meaning, of purpose that can be hard to find sometimes. So like, how do we make it all work together, the modern world and that spiritual side?
It's a question more and more people are asking themselves. And I don't think there's one right answer for everybody. But one thing that really stuck with me from what you shared is that maybe spirituality isn't becoming less important in our modern world. Maybe it's actually becoming even more important.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
That makes sense. It's like with everything around us constantly trying to grab our attention, spirituality is that thing that tells us to slow down, look inward, reconnect with ourselves, right?
Right. Like, think about how popular mindfulness and meditation have become. I mean, these practices have been around for ages, right?
Yeah.
They're rooted in these ancient traditions. But now you see everyone from like big-time CEOs to like athletes to people who stay home with their kids using them. And the thing is, it's not just some trend. The research actually shows that these practices are really good for us, like for our mental and physical health.
It's almost like we're rediscovering this ancient wisdom and realizing that, hey, it still applies to our lives today.
Exactly. And I think that says a lot about how powerful these practices can be. You know, They help us connect with something deeper, something more meaningful than just the hustle and bustle of everyday life. They help us tap into that well of peace and resilience and purpose that I think everyone has inside them.
So it's not about like rejecting the modern world or anything. It's more like finding ways to deal with all the craziness while staying grounded, right? Like staying connected to something bigger than ourselves.
You got it. It's all about finding that balance. And look, how that looks is going to be different for everybody. For some people, that might mean meditating every day or doing yoga. For others, it might be spending time in nature, connecting with their community, or even just doing something creative that makes them feel alive.
Yeah, it's about finding what works for you, right? The things that help you connect with that sense of something bigger, something more important than just getting through the day.
That's it. And I think the biggest thing is to just be open to trying new things. You know, explore different paths, see what feels right. Your own understanding of what spirituality means to you will change and grow as you do. It's a journey.
That's a really good point. It's not about finding the right answer or following some strict set of rules that someone made up. It's about that journey, that exploration of what it means to live a life that feels, I don't know, more connected, more meaningful.
And it's a journey worth taking, because I really believe that spirituality, however you define it, gives us a way to become whole again, you know, to connect with that part of ourselves that's searching for meaning, searching for connection, searching for something more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into spirituality, I want to leave you, our listeners, with this. What really resonated with you today? What piqued your interest? What do you want to learn more about?
And remember, there are no right or wrong answers. Just trust your gut, follow your curiosity, and see where this journey takes you. You never know what amazing things you might find.